Letters from Whitechapel is a 2 to 6 player deduction game all about the Jack the Ripper murder mysteries. Now it's worth noting that this game takes a fairly historical approach to the theme, and if you know the history behind the theme, you'll understand why this won't be a game for everyone. In Letters from Whitechapel, one player will take on the role of Jack the Ripper himself. That player will then be committing murders and afterward trying to return to their hideout without being apprehended by the remaining players who will be the investigators of Scotland Yard. During the game, there are going to be a few setup phases before the chase to find Jack will actually begin. But once Jack commits a murder, the investigators will flock to the crime scene to attempt to find Jack, or at least to gather enough clues to lead them to his hideout. So let's check out a brief overview of the game, and then I'll tell you my thoughts on it. The first thing you're going to notice about Letters from Whitechapel is the board, which is a stunning map of the Whitechapel district of London. As you can see, the streets are all marked out with dotted lines. On these lines, there are many circles containing numbers and also some small black boxes. During the game, Jack will move secretly along the street's dotted lines, moving from a numbered space to an adjacent numbered space. The investigators will move along the same dotted lines as Jack, but from a black box to an adjacent black box. At the start of the game, Jack will be handed a notepad and folder. This notepad is where Jack will keep track of his movements throughout the game. Each time he moves to a numbered space, he must note the numbered space he moved to on the sheet in the appropriate space. This is how Jack's movements are kept secret from the investigators. The notepad's folder is a really nice addition too, as it has a small printout of the map on it. This is great as Jack can refer to this map rather than staring at the board, which if he does that, it may give away his location to the investigators. The first thing Jack does before the game starts is designate a numbered space as his hideout. He notes that space's number here on the pad. This will be the location that he has to return to each night without being caught. The game is broken down into 4 turns. After the 4th turn, if the investigators have not caught Jack, Jack will be declared the winner. For the most part, the 4 turns in the game follow the same sequence. The first phase of this sequence sees Jack receive a number of special move tokens depending on what turn it is. In the first turn, he will receive 3 stagecoach tokens and 2 alley tokens. These tokens, when used by Jack, grant him a move that is greater than his normal movement value. When Jack uses one of these tokens, he must announce that he has done so. The second phase sees Jack receive woman tokens. Again, how many he gets will be dependent on what turn it is. These woman tokens are either marked or unmarked. Unmarked tokens are basically decoys, and the marked ones will mark where Jack's victim pawns will eventually be placed. The woman tokens must initially be placed on the red numbered spaces marked on the board, but which ones are decoys or not, only Jack will know. The third phase is the head of investigation will be revealed. The head of investigation is then put in charge of placing the patrol tokens. The patrol tokens, just like the woman tokens, are either marked or unmarked. Unmarked ones are basically just decoys, and marked ones are marked with a colour corresponding to an investigator's pawn. So the marked tokens will indicate where the investigator pawns will be located. When placing these tokens, there are a few limitations as to where the head of investigation may initially place them. The 4th phase is Jack's victims are revealed. Jack turns over all the previously placed woman tokens and replaces the marked ones with these white victim pawns. All remaining decoy tokens are then placed aside. Jack must then choose to kill one of the victims or wait. If he kills, you go straight into the hunt, which is the main part of the game. If Jack decides to wait though, the head of investigation gets to move the victim pawns one space away from their current location. Usually the head of investigation will do this, attempting to move them closer to the non-decoy patrol tokens. However, if Jack waits, he gets to reveal a patrol marker and see if it's a decoy or not. This helps him get a better understanding of where the investigators may be located on the board. This step may be repeated a maximum of 4 times, so Jack can choose to wait 4 times in a row, revealing police tokens. But on the 5th time this occurs, he must choose a victim to kill. So when Jack has decided to kill, he will replace one of the victim pawns of his choosing with a crime scene marker, which the crime scene markers are like little red transparent bingo markers. After a killing, the hunt will then begin. which is where Jack will attempt to return home and the investigators will attempt to discover where Jack is and where he is headed to after each murder. When the hunt begins, all the patrol tokens are revealed and the police pawns are placed where the marked tokens were. All decoy tokens are then placed aside. At the beginning of a hunt, Jack first gets to move from his current numbered location to an adjacent numbered location, and he makes note of the movement on his notepad. Unless he used a special movement token, the investigators will have some idea of where he's currently located at this point, because he won't have had the opportunity to venture far from the crime scene. Jack's normal movement is only one space. The investigators then get to move their pawns and take actions. They can move up to 2 small black boxes away each turn. As an example of movement and actions, the brown investigator here moves 2 spaces using the black boxes as his guide. 1, 2. He can then check for clues as an action or arrest as an action. There are only those 2 options. To check for clues, he announces a numbered location adjacent to his pawn. Jack then replies whether or not he has been there at any point during the hunt phase. Jack checks this, of course, by referring to his notepad. If Jack has been to the numbered space that's being searched for clues, the location is marked with a clue token, which are like little transparent bingo markers. But if Jack hasn't been there, the investigators may have wasted an opportunity. Eventually, with the way the clues work, you'll discover a trail that's left by Jack, but you're trying to figure out exactly where it's leading to, and that's the big question that needs to be answered. As a note, an investigator can check several adjacent locations for clues as part of one action. That is possible. The arrest action is the other option, and it is less common. It is used when someone believes Jack is currently on a numbered space. Instead of asking Jack if there will be a clue on a numbered space, the investigator can say he is arresting that space. If Jack happens to be currently located at that space, he is arrested and the game ends immediately. Mostly, however, the investigators will be asking for clues, trying to track Jack's steps. This hunt phase is repeated with Jack moving, then the investigators moving and taking actions until Jack gets home or until he is caught. And Jack also keeps track of the number of times he moves in the hunt phase. If he doesn't get home by the end of this track here on the board, he loses the game. So I really like this game, but I just wanted to touch on a few of the downsides first up. Starting with the components, I think the clue tokens really should have been blue. The clear tokens are okay, but they're easily camouflaged when they're on the board. Also, the patrol tokens and the woman tokens are, in my opinion, too small. They're very fiddly and not the best quality either. My patrol tokens are starting to look a bit shabby. Other than that though, the components are quite nice. Now with multiple investigators, I've encountered a number of issues with this game. Downtime was a bit of a problem on occasion. Sometimes your investigator pawn may be located nowhere near the action, so you don't really feel directly involved in the investigation, which is a bit dull. I've also seen dominant investigators who tell others what to do. I've seen pads and pencils used by the investigators, which I can deal with that as long as they're not taking too much time taking notes. I've also seen a player get out tokens from another game and place them all over the board. Each turn, as the investigators received more information, that investigator would remove these tokens, and that really gave the investigators a clear view of how the investigation was going, and that sounds like a good idea, but for me it totally killed the tense atmosphere that the game can create. You know, it felt more like a puzzle than a game at that point. So people have different ideas of how the investigation should be handled, and they don't necessarily mesh well together sometimes. I'm much more of a let's just play and see how we go type of player. Now, there are also 4 turns in the game. Each turn one player will be the head of investigation. What's wrong with that, you may ask? Well, there are 5 investigators, so one player is guaranteed to miss out on being the head of investigation, and that just doesn't really sit right with me. But it only comes into play when you're playing it with 6 players, so you know, it's not really that big of a deal. The playtime can be around 3 hours with multiple investigators, which in my opinion is too long. I never felt it dragging or anything, but if I have 3 hours spare and 5 willing opponents, there would be other games I'd prefer to play. So with 3 or more players, I'm likely to turn down a game of Letters from Whitechapel more often than not. But with 2 players, the criticisms I just gave about the gameplay are irrelevant. Because there's only ever one head of investigation, they'll of course always feel directly involved in the game, making decisions for all the investigator pawns, and the playtime is also closer to 2 hours. So as a 2-player game, it's simply fantastic. Now, I like playing the investigators more than I do Jack, and I think that's because of my love for mystery television shows such as the new Sherlock series. I'm a big fan of that. And I can just really get into the investigator's role in this game. It does a good job at not only testing your skills at deduction, but also memory, and just generally reading your opponent, because bluffing may play a very big part in this game, as Jack can head north initially when in fact his hideout is south. And with the way the clues work, that can really throw the investigators off, because remember, by searching for clues, the investigators may find out where Jack has been during the night, but not when during the night he was there. So by the time you've found a clue, it may be a bit old. You're really aiming to stay right on Jack's tail and make him sweat. And as Jack, when the investigators are right on your tail and you finally lose them, it's a very satisfying moment, let me tell you. Overall, I find Letters from Whitechapel to be a very tense game for both Jack and the investigators. It's a really engaging game, and I'd say it's fairly balanced too. No one role seems to jump out at me as being dominant in terms of winning. I think the Jack role can feel easier to play just because Jack has more open information to go on to achieve his victory condition, but really I think I've seen Jack lose just as much as I've seen him win. Anyway, it's a great game if you can find a copy of it. Someone has to get this game back out to the public. It needs to be reprinted. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again soon.